very nicely read. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Welcome to our Sunday service at our beautiful Ananda Center here in Beaverton. For those of you who may not know us, this is Nayaswami Jyotish, and I am Nayaswami Devi, and we serve as the spiritual directors for Ananda Worldwide. And in that capacity, do a lot of traveling and teaching, sharing Yogananda's teachings with people throughout the world. And it's a joy to be here and see many old friends and to share these uplifting teachings. So I want to begin by reading a passage from Whispers from Eternity. And this one's it's on page, for those who are following along, page 41, number 199. 141. And this is sort of a whimsical one, so as some of them are, so don't expect, it's like the devotee's heart unbared. This is called Endless Thrills of Delight. I attuned my life with thine. Now my life has become a long, unbroken inspiration. The fountain of bliss refreshes and delights me night and day, whether I be wakeful, fast asleep, or dreaming fondly of thee. Oh, what will become of me? Delight on overwhelming delight, endless, indescribable thrills of divine delight spray unceasingly over me. O aged nectar, wine of centuries, I found thee at last and will taste of thy sweetness forever, forever, forever. So, this beautiful passage where Christ says to Judas, me you have not always with you, but the poor you have always with you. What does that really mean? The poor represents the duality of the world, the pain and the suffering, the happiness and the fulfillment, and they're forever fluctuating, forever in play. And because the nature of this world is not what it seems. In fact, I was thinking of if I would write a title for the little talk that we're going to share, and Jyotish will also speak. We both speak when we are traveling. It would be the unseen life. The unseen life. Because we see the world and we think, oh, it's terrible, or it's beautiful, or he's ahead in the polls or she's ahead in the polls, and this is good and this is bad. And we're forever pulled outside of ourselves. But it's always changing, and it can never provide us the kind of happiness or security that we're looking for. But Christ says, the divine speaking through him, I'm not always with you, so focus on me. And what does that mean? Because if God is eternal, God is omnipresent, God is always with us, why does he say, me you have not always with you? He's always with us. He or she, Divine Mother, however you want to frame the divine, is always with us, but we don't focus on it. So there could be this beautiful music playing in the other room, but if we're arguing with our friend, we don't hear that other music. And that's really the point. That beautiful divine song is always there to be heard. That's why we love listening to Swami's music, because it isn't just the words or the notes or the harmony. It's the divine consciousness behind it that make them, when we perform or sing these songs, it's more accessible to us. And so we have to look behind the curtain. You know, many of us grew up with the Wizard of Oz, and there is the great and powerful Oz, and don't pay attention to that little man behind the curtain. But we do want to pay attention to the little man behind the curtain, the little woman behind the curtain. That's the one who's orchestrating the whole thing. And we look in the wrong places. But to the unseen life, to see behind the forms. There was a wonderful direct disciple of our guru, Kamala de Silva. You may carry her books here in the boutique. She wrote two beautiful books, Priceless Precepts and Flawless Mirror. That's the first one that came out, Flawless Mirror. And she was a great, exalted soul. But at the end of her life, she was afflicted with dementia. And we cared for her at Ananda Village for some years until it was more than we really needed professional medical help. So we put her in an assisted living home. And we went to visit her. Some of our girls went to visit her one day. And they were a little distressed to see that her roommate was a woman who had been in a fire, and her face was horribly burnt and disfigured. And they thought, oh, poor Kamala, she who had these beautiful visions of the astral world, and now to spend these last years of her life having to see this horribly disfigured face every day. And we went into her room, and Kamala blissfully said, have you met my roommate? Isn't she beautiful? And that's all she saw. She saw the divine spirit behind whatever mask Divine Mother was wearing in that form. And that's the challenge for all of us, to see behind the disfigurement of this world and to see the goodness and the beauty in any circumstances. You know, Swamiji Jyotish started this morning when he said, hello, all you great souls. Swami would often say that to us. He would walk into a room where we were, and with total sincerity and joy, would just say, good morning, all you great souls. And at first, we would look around to see who had come in, because we thought he couldn't possibly be talking to us. But that's how he saw us. And that's how the saints see all of us. They don't see us the way we see ourselves. Oh, I spoke out of turn, or I was, whatever, had a negative emotion, or I pushed my way to the front of the line to get on the bus. You know, they only see us in our highest potential. And Master would look at some of the devotees from time to time, and he would say, how beautiful you all are. I see you all as beings of light. And yet, why don't we see ourselves that way? Because when you begin to see the divine in everything, in every circumstance, only then can you accept that the divine dwells within you as well. And when you begin to realize that, such freedom. And yes, we may still have things we're working on, but they just aren't that important. The only thing that's important is to get our priorities in the right order so that we say, God first. Yes, the world may be a hellhole, but God first. And there's another remarkable story that it was a documentary that we saw called Return with Honor. And it was a documentary about American pilots who had been shot down over Vietnam during the war, and they were incarcerated in what they called the Hanoi Hilton, which was a prisoner of war building, and they were tortured mercilessly daily. But it was interviews with some of them who had survived and how they survived. And the people that survived that were interviewed were all people of deep faith in God. And that's what enabled them to survive. And one man said that he was tortured daily for information that they didn't have. And but he would pray, and he would repeat Psalms and the Lord's Prayer and just whatever he could think of. He was a Christian from the Bible. But then one day he was so sick and so exhausted that when they dragged him into the room for his daily therapy, he just prayed, Lord, I have nothing left. I have no resistance left. You have to take over now. And he said he felt this wave of grace just come over him. And he looked at the man who had been torturing him, the same fellow, every day for years. It was like 5 years. And he looked at him, and he didn't see that man, but he only saw God. And he said, don't you understand? There's nothing you can do that will hurt me. And the man was horrified and ran out of the room and would never come near him again. But the ability, even in the darkness, the darkest moment of your life, to have that prayer go up and say, Lord, you take over now, and then to be able to see it was always only God. Whatever happened, it was only God. And for all of us, I read somewhere that something like 90% of Americans pray to God when they are having serious health problems. And so we have those moments in our lives. And what I find helpful, a practice that I do, because I think we all have had touches of God's presence in our life, maybe from childhood, maybe out in nature, maybe in a moment of extreme challenging, but we've all had moments where we just said, Lord, I really need you now. And then you experience something. And it's so important to focus on that. This is the only priority. What did that feel like when you felt God listening to your prayer? Remember what it felt like and expand on it and try to live in that moment all the time. And sometimes I kind of trace back throughout this incarnation, and I think of moments where I really, from childhood, when I really felt God's presence. And then years go by, and you forget. But if we can highlight those moments and say, these were the most significant moments in my life, because in those moments I felt who I really was. And in those moments when we do feel God's presence, it leaves a permanent impression in our consciousness. It is not lost. You think, oh yes, I remember that beautiful experience, but now I can't access it anymore. You can access it if you interiorize your consciousness enough. And there's a story that Master's first disciple in America, Dr. Lewis, lived in Boston. And once Master was visiting him in the home that Dr. Lewis grew up in from childhood. And it was in Boston, it was a 2-story home. And Master stopped, he was going up to his bedroom on the 2nd floor, his guest room. And he stopped on the landing and he said, God was here. And then Dr. Lewis paused and thought, and then he remembered when he was a little boy, he was being very naughty, and his mother had told him to do something, and he was not listening to his mother. And just on that landing, he heard Divine Mother say, his name was Minot, Minot, you'd better listen to your mother. And that was I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years earlier. But that moment when God spoke with him left a permanent impression in the ether of God's presence. That's why we love to come to sacred places. It's why we love to go on pilgrimages, because those vibrations of God's presence are permanently registered there. And Master, being one with God, merely had to stand on that landing, and he could feel that God had spoken in that spot. And so remember those moments when you have felt close to God, and build your life on that awareness. Try to draw it to you. Try to, in meditation, call on that. And then it becomes endless streams of bliss. There's no, oh yes, that happened 5 years ago. It didn't, it happened a moment ago. It's in the present. That's the beauty. God's consciousness is in the eternal now. It's not the past. It's not the future. It's right now. And every moment that you felt God's presence in your life is accessible to you right now, if you know how to tune into it. And then the unseen life, finally, and then Jyotish will share. Also in this passage that we read, it talked about service to God being an important way to remember Him. But that service doesn't often, or doesn't necessarily have to be recognized. I remember many years ago, a group of us would go over one day a week, a group of women, and we cleaned Swami Kriyananda's house at Ananda Village at the Crystal Hermitage. He would go away for the day, go into, do some errands or something. And one day we went in, and we would all just look around, and one person would say, I'll do this and I'll do that. And I went into the bathroom and I looked at the shower stall, and it was covered with mildew. And I thought, I'm going to work on this. So I went in the shower stall, it was a fiberglass shower stall, and all day long, I just scrubbed mildew off. It was really built up in there. But then I started getting, at first I was so joyful. It was so much fun. And then I started thinking, you know, Swami's never going to know that I spent all day scrubbing the mildew off. He doesn't care. No one knows that I've done this. What's the point? No recognition, no glory. But, and so I started having those kind of self-pitying thoughts. And then we were all done and we were leaving, and Swami came in just at that moment, and we didn't talk to him, we just were pranaming. And he looked and he said, gosh, I hope someone cleaned this shower stall. That's really what I wanted to have done today. And it was just such an answer. But I think if I had been more evolved, he wouldn't have said anything. He was picking up my thoughts that I needed some recognition for what I'd done. So I was happy in the moment, but over time I thought it would have been sweeter if he didn't have to say it. But the unseen life, every time we think about God, every time we connect with Him, it builds an energy field around us. Every act of service, and more beautiful if it is unseen and unrecognized and unpraised, it builds a connection between you and God. And step by step, the veils fall away, and we can really say, I feel you always. I feel your joy, your energy, your love. And it's been a very fine journey to get to this point.
Hello, everybody. I shouldn't say everybody, I should say hello, friends, because we are all friends. You know, one difficulty with reading a passage from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or Scripture is that we can be momentarily fooled into thinking that it happened far, far away and long, long ago, maybe in another galaxy or whatever. But it's in the past, it's happening to somebody else, it doesn't really pertain to us. But true Scripture, as Devi was saying, lives all the time. Those truths live all the time, and they're alive right now. One time we were in the Holy Land, And we were at the Holy Land, being in Israel, and we were at the place reputed to be where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, Gregory was with us. And blessed are those, it goes on in that vein. And so there's a little chapel there, and we meditated for a while in the chapel, and then we went into the garden, and we read those words. And then we went back, and we were meditating and praying. And then we heard, as Davy was saying, it's like a unheard melody is always playing. But there we heard, and we heard those same words being read in French and Korean and Japanese, and I don't know what all other the languages were, but not just one at a time. Little groups were there, and we realized that those words, spoken some 2,000 years ago, were repeated all the time. And so the divine is an eternal now. It isn't a past, it isn't a future, it's an eternal now. And in order to perceive the eternal now, in order to perceive the divine in the eternal now, we have to calm ourselves and pay attention. Davy used the phrase, if there's a beautiful song playing in the next room, but we're in here arguing, we aren't going to hear that. Well, our minds are so often arguing, aren't they? We're so often disturbed with something. That's what this passage means. Here's Mary rubbing costly ointment into the feet of Jesus. And that's a very honored Eastern tradition, to rub the feet of the guru, the feet of the teacher. There's a energetic exchange that happens with that. So that was an act of worship, regardless of the form of it. That was an act of worship and an act of paying attention to the divine. And then there's represented the opposite of Judas, who last week we heard him saying, why should that costly ointment be used for this nonsensical purpose? It should be sold and the money given to the poor. Well, as it goes on, he didn't care about the poor. He kept the purse and he wanted the money for himself, was the explanation. But even if he didn't want the money for himself, what he was saying there, and this is pertinent to all of us, is that here's a divine incident happening. And he's breaking that and saying, don't pay attention to him, let's think about the problems. And so we have the potential for that melody, that divine melody, to play in our mind at any time. But we don't hear it because we're focused on the problems. Whether we identify with those problems as ours, or whether so often they're somebody else's problems. They're the politics problems, they're the nation's problems. But whatever it is, we're arguing with the world. We're arguing with, if the divine is omnipresent and we reject things, this isn't about discrimination, this is emotional rejection. If we reject the divine in the form that it comes to us, then we won't hear that melody. It's really as simple as that. So how do we turn that element around? Well, it starts with when that melody is really loud and we do hear it clearly, to treasure that moment, to really listen to that, not to turn around to the problems. So in meditation, if you have a time of calmness, if you have a time of peace, of joy, if you see the light in meditation, treasure that, hold on to it, and don't go back to the poor that you have always with you, the problems that you have always with you. Don't start arguing. Don't let the mind get restless. Hold on to that moment. And if we do that when the divine is more palpably present, then we can begin to practice that in the times when that music is a little bit softer, or where the circumstances are such that it's a little bit harder to listen to the divine. What does that mean? Swami used to laugh because people would come and say, this was when we were living in San Francisco, they would say, "Oh, Master was so kind to me today. He gave me a parking place right downtown within a half a block of where I was going." Swami, oh, very nice, very nice. But, so we think the divine is blessing us when he fulfills our little petty desires. But if the divine is there in your fulfillment of what you like, does that mean the divine is not there when that parking place isn't there? Well, most people make that kind of a subconscious. I mean, when you say it, straight out like this, everybody says, "Oh no, I don't act like that." But don't we normally think that when things please us, that the divine is more present than when things don't please us? But the divine is equally present all the time. And so beginning to train the mind, first of all, to hold on to those experiences when the divine is more palpably there, then to be even-minded so that you say, no matter what happens, that thank you, God. Thank you for giving me that parking place. Thank you for not giving me that parking place so I could get some extra steps on my Fitbit. Thank you for giving me good health. Thank you for giving me poor health so that I can be released a little bit from attachment to the body and the body's conditions. Thank you, God. Thank you for everything. And if we can train our minds more and more to say thank you for everything, then we begin to hear that quiet melody played everywhere, because it is everywhere. It's omnipresent. There's a beautiful story of a young devotee, a boy of 6 or 7, who was in the ashram of a guru. And he went back for the weekend to visit his family. And when he came back, the guru asked him, how did your weekend go? Did you enjoy seeing your parents? And the little boy, and this takes a very high state of consciousness, but the little boy said, "Oh, Baba, I only saw you." And then the guru said, "Well, didn't you see your brothers and sisters?" "No, Baba, I only saw you." "Didn't you play with your friends?" "No, Baba, I only played with you." "Oh, Baba, don't tease me anymore. All I saw was you." And so, in a heightened state, as sometimes you have to fake it until you make it, and so we can't always perceive the divine most of the time, or most of us, but we can fake it. We can say that the divine is here until not only do we make it, but we become it. And if we will train our minds to say thank you to everything that comes to us, and to try to see the people that we work with as the divine. And if you find them a little bit like eating a chestnut that hasn't been peeled and still has the spikes on it, Master said of someone, they're too sticky to spit out and too hot to swallow. If you find somebody like that or a circumstance like that, still thank the divine. Well, that was an interesting lesson. Thank you. And so it doesn't arise in the mind. It arises in the heart. It arises in the heart's desire to always be in the presence of the divine. It's actually the mind that gets in the way and says, well, that can't be divine. That's hot and sticky and I want to spit it out and I can't. But the heart still wants, actually, he said, a mouthful of hot molasses. So that molasses is still sweet, even if it is hot and sticky. But if you think of it only as hot or only as sticky, only as something to be spit out, you won't be able to taste the sweetness. Every experience at its core has a particular kind of joy. And if you can tap in to that particular joy and not push it away, not push life away, not push people away or experiences away, not push it away, just try to listen sensitively and see to the core where the joy and the presence of God lies. As I say, at first you may be faking it, but gradually you won't. It will be there, and you will feel an underlying current of joy that is with you all the time, and you'll begin to see that God is everywhere. And those people that you rejected before, you'll begin to see as what an interesting world God has created with all this variety and all this beautiful expression of His and her presence in everything.